Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the Coastal Catch-Ups. How are you?
I'm good. All good here. How are you?
Yes, all good, all good. Can't complain. I was wondering if you could start by just telling us a bit about yourself, what you've been up to in the past, what you're up to these days.
Okay, so I'm Rachel Millar. I'll say Dr. Rachel Millar.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, and I am working as a marine conservation officer with Ulster Wildlife. And at the minute we are working on primarily native oyster restoration. So yeah, we have two really great native oyster nurseries set up in Bangor and Glenarm. So yeah, we have a group of volunteers that work at that site, and yeah, it's a great project to be involved with, and that is funded through DERA. We have future funding that is allowing us to take that further and hopefully can lead to really exciting seabed deployments of native oysters in and around Northern Ireland. We also are working on seagrass and salt marsh projects in the future. So that is where we're at. And I'll tell you a wee bit about the native oyster,
Well,
the projects itself. So basically, we call them nurseries. It's basically like a brood stock of oysters. So we keep them in cages and hang them beneath the pontoons in marinas. So like I said, it's in Bangor Marina at the minute and in Glenarm Marina, and they are attached, just hang below it. Some of them are under the actual slots in it or just hanging off the edge. And we keep them there just because it means people can't lift them and get at them. It's just safe and out of the way. And it means that our volunteers and our staff can get down and we can access them and keep to our permits. So we have to have aquaculture licenses to keep oysters in these areas. And we go down and we monitor them by checking their mortality. We also check their growth. Just important to keep track that everything's healthy and happy. We monitor the biodiversity as well. And like I said, we have amazing volunteers that join us weekly, bi-weekly, and we all go down to the pontoons and have a right laugh and measure oysters. So it's really great, and it's great to get people involved. I suppose you would say it's more small scale restoration than it's not massive. We have in Bangor around 700 oysters, and in Glenarm we have about 800 oysters. So it's not massive. We're not like big oyster farmers. Uh, and we're just monitoring them and keeping track of all that. And hopefully we can expand it out to larger scale. Like I said, seabed deployments would be really exciting for Northern Ireland. There is loads of oyster projects all across England, Scotland, and Wales, and Northern Ireland, sadly, is probably lagging behind in any restoration programs at all. Um, yeah, the wild oysters really kicked off this sort of technique of putting the oysters in the marine harbors and marinas, and having them accessible but not too accessible for people to lift them and sell them. I think an oyster nowadays can go for about £3.50 a pop. So I probably shouldn't have said that. That's it. They'll all be gone. They'll be
I'm
gone in the morning.
I'm in the fence.
So yeah, hopefully it's a really good engagement tool and gets local people involved, and hopefully it'll lead to bigger projects. And at the minute, we have funding to put in one native oyster nursery along our coast somewhere for the next 5 years. So you'll see many more of them. So we'll be creating a great network. And like I said, it's a broodstock. Hopefully they spawn and that larvae floats away and settles somewhere nice, and they can just create their natural habitats, back where they should be, and create oyster reefs all around Belfast Lough or in and around Glenarm, the Antrim coastline.
Very good. So, what's the story behind the native oyster? If you were to show me an oyster, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between.
Yeah, between the two.
Um, what what's happened to them? Why are these conservation programs needed now? What's their story?
Yeah, so basically the native oyster, also known as the European flat oyster, Ostrea edulis, is I'll just maybe describe the differences to the
Uh-huh.
two. So they're like a flat oyster that's kind of rounded around the edges, quite smooth. It's like a brownish, yellowish tinge to it. And they are like they're the ones. I suppose the Pacific oysters are the ones that people would identify as an oyster. It's that teardrop shape. They're quite sharp looking, chunky. They've got a wee purpley tinge to them, and they're the invasive non-native species that we have here in Northern Ireland. And they are mostly what is farmed here and in the UK.
Okay.
The native oyster is a slow grower, so it it's not as you wouldn't get your money's worth maybe out of farming them
Yes.
as you would with the Pacifics. But so the native oyster itself used to be prolific. It used to be a prolific oyster fishery across Northern Ireland and all our sea lochs, Loch Foyle, Carlingford, Larne, Belfast Loch. But it was basically just overfished. So by the mid 19th century, it was basically near extinction. They basically said that, they had to close the fisheries because there was none left. They were just dredged all up. Um, so since then, it's been a 95% decline
Hmm.
on the native oyster. And there is pockets of wild populations in Strangford Lough that have sort of survived and that's down to different projects. And I think it was the Fishermen's Association in Strangford Lough many years ago, tried to do a similar, broodstock technique, and it did work. The broodstock settled on the eastern side of Strangford Lough, so that's where you do get the wee populations and the wee pockets of them still existing.
I think these
But
areas.
yeah,
Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, like they just declined really, and then we haven't helped matters with pollution of our waterways and just basically habitat loss, but just so many positives that come with them. That's why we really should be promoting them, and they're a priority species in UK and Ireland, and we're currently going through a biodiversity crisis and a climate crisis, and they really tick the box for solving some of those, like a nature-based solution to solve some of those problems. Yeah.
So those sorts of nature-based solutions, we're talking carbon capture.
Yeah, yeah. So
Talking.
they are a wee bit, oysters are a bit hit or miss with the carbon capture because they are a shellfish and they are an animal, so they are producing carbon as well as capturing carbon in their calcium carbonate shells. So it's really, yeah, there is, I read a paper recently there, but it was actually on blue mussels,
Mhm.
and it suggests that there is a slight positive for the carbon capture
Okay.
side, but it just depends. There's a lot of factors to consider, but they're really important for biodiversity and their ecosystem services. So they improve the water quality so well. They can filter one mature oyster can filter 200 liters, which is like a bathtub of water a day.
Well,
So if you imagine if you had like hundreds of them on a big reef, taking in all that algae and everything else, all the organic nutrients in the water,
mm,
and just it makes it, the water it improves water clarity then for your seagrass and your kelp and those species that are photosynthesizing, and it helps them, and they're also great for carbon capture. So yeah, it's a real win-win, and they create such dynamic structures that they're like homes and nursery grounds to fish and other wee species. So yeah, they're just positive all around. So we should be putting them out everywhere.
they work for Rachel.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, that's awesome. So the threats, I always wondered. So you always hear about oysters being really good for water quality, um, but there's obviously a threshold. So they obviously can't if you pour in tons and tons of sewage and all that.
yeah.
There's obviously a threshold where they can't cope, and I suppose that's where your the food stand, like if you're talking about oyster farms, like that's maybe
Yes.
where the food standards come in, like the quality of the oysters.
Yeah.
There is
Well,
fresh.
that's the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Like oysters can obviously withstand, they're an intertidal, well, they're subtidal and intertidal species. You can get them in different parts of the shoreline, but they have so much of a tolerance range for loads of aspects like temperature and obviously they're what they can handle pollution wise. But they do take in a lot of nutrients. They've been known even to take in some plastics and then coat them in mucus and then excrete them and bury them basically into the seabed again. So they are pretty robust. But obviously, like you said, they just can't handle like a lot thrown at them and probably a lot thrown at them at once. I said there at the start they were, slow growers and, you know, that's probably why it's like trickier for them to settle is because you might be losing like the more mature ones that are reproducing and then you might you're getting that population dynamics is getting a wee bit messed up with everything, but yeah.
Um, you mentioned about public engagement and volunteers working on this project. How
Yeah.
important is that? And um, it, going forward, I assume it's going to be a bigger factor. I don't know, is there like citizen science projects to get people involved? And for anyone listening that hasn't heard of citizen science, it's basically like anyone being taught the basics and being able to survey and monitor and stuff like that. So, is there any plans for that with your work?
Um, yeah, so we obviously need volunteers because we have so many oysters, like, and it is an engagement tool. It is great to get people down, whether that be schools or corporate groups or, just local members of the community getting involved. We need people that are keen to get down, get dirty, because it is a messy job. And yeah, we have got a brilliant group of volunteers at Bangor that are well established now for nearly it's coming on nearly a year that they've been there, and we have went on shore walks with them to do surveys. Really super keen to get involved in general citizen science, not just oysters. And then, some of these people come from marine backgrounds, whether they have boats or they've been divers before, or some people just want to get out and see what's around them, and some of them are also students as well that are just needing experience, to try and pursue their careers into these fields. But in regards to like projects, we have a lot of placement students at the minute that are starting more individual, quite unique projects, looking at different, looking at mainly we've got a placement student concentrating on the use of copper tape around cages to reduce biofouling. We have a student also looking at basically the difference between what has settled on wild population of oyster shells and what settles on the shell when they're actually within our nurseries, and is there any difference in the biodiversity there? Um, and so we have quite a range of wee projects on the go, and we hopefully will expand. Obviously, when we get more native oyster nurseries on the go, there'll be more projects coming up, but they're more placement student focused. But we would love to do more shore surveys, etc., with our volunteers because it's great just to get out and see what's actually out there. And yeah.
I'm sure, just taking Bangor Marina as an example, I take it people have been involved there that had no idea or about the different oysters and that sort of thing. I'm sure it's good to see
Yeah, yeah.
that as well.
Yeah, we have we've had people that are maybe from more of the terrestrial side of volunteering with Ulster Wildlife, and they've seen this and they're like, oh, that looks interesting. And, they always say, green spaces are obviously really good for your mental health, but so are blue spaces. And, people seeing that and, they would like to be by the water, maybe not during the winter when it's like snowing and hailstoning on you and you're sitting on a pontoon. But everyone, like, it is good fun all together and everyone's learning. And everyone's learning new things. And I actually think the volunteers know more than me now. So they could probably, some of them have been buying books on oysters. I think they could actually just take it over now and just run it themselves. And we've also had, so we had a school down at the launch for Glenarm.
Mm.
We had a local primary school, Seaview Integrated Primary School, and it was just great to show them what is right on their doorstep. Their school is overlooking the marina, and it's just so good to have people down to be able to see, this is actually what is naturally occurring in the waters around here, and just to give them a wee bit of education on that.
Yeah, brilliant. The future generation of marine
Marine
biology
biologists.
scientists. Very good. Well, that's all really exciting, Rachel, and I'm excited to see if the small scale nurseries and stuff like that. I'm excited to see when it goes larger scale in the
Big
bigger nurseries.
scale.
Big.
Yeah. Yeah, big scale. So at the minute, we're at the stage of trying to figure out how we can do that in Northern Ireland, what sort of licensing and permits are required, because it's never been done before. It's sort of like we're still at that very early stage, and people are obviously quite cautious and wary about it. But they have done great work over in England in the Solent. They've been doing seascapes. So that's with salt marsh, seagrass, and oysters. And, they're sort of a great example to go back to show that, they're just doing that across there. We can do something similar here.
Yeah, yeah. Um, no, that's interesting. I think we'll maybe come back to oysters, but if you don't
Yeah.
mind, I'm going to park oysters for now. Uh,
Yes, that's fine.
so I wanted to ask, you have been, you did a PhD. I wanted to
Yeah.
ask about that, how you found it, what was the subject, if you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I was actually telling the placement students today about it. They probably didn't even want to hear it, but I was telling them anyway. Um, so I studied marine biology at Queen's. I had originally went to study at Dundee University to study environmental science and dropped out, and then was like, oh, I need to pick something else to do now. So a year later, I was trying to decide what to do, and I wanted something exciting that was going to actually entertain me in a way. So I was looking at marine biology or archaeology, and yeah, got on to both. So I ended up going for marine biology. And yeah, so did that degree. Towards the end of it, I had my undergraduate project, and I was looking at the 6 degrees of forces on kelp. So took kelp, it was quite experimental, took kelp and stuck it in the wave tank at the David Care in a force transducer, and basically was measuring all the forces on it and the directions. And that led on to then a PhD opening came up with my supervisor at the time, Louise Craigting. And she basically was like, do you want to just continue this line of work on in? So sort of went to the dark side of engineering, trying to be an engineer, a pretend engineer. So yeah, that was how that all came about. And my PhD was titled The Influence of Hydrodynamics on, gee, it's quite lengthy, on the growth, erosion, and biomechanical properties of the kelp Laminaria digitata. Had to really think there. It's probably wrong. It's probably not even the title.
In terms of hydrodynamics, is that like storm events, like looking at their vulnerability to storms, or?
So we actually used Strangford Lough as my sort of overall base site, because obviously there's so much variation and the hydrodynamics is so diverse there. And there was kelp everywhere. Like there's kelp all along the shoreline, but it's so different and it looks different as well. So like it could be the same species, but they look completely different. The morphology is so diverse. So we just decided to stick to Strangford Lough, and we were basically trying to pick sites that were hydrodynamically different, and we needed to prove that they were different, because it's quite common in a lot of biology to just be like a site is exposed or sheltered, and there's no measurement of it. But when you're in this strange world between engineering and marine biology. The engineers are like, you need to have this, nailed down. You can't just say it's exposed. How exposed? So I ended up putting out ADCPs, and some other instruments along my sites that I had picked, and was able to define if somewhere was, I classified them sort of as low wave, low current, high wave, and like they were all like a big combination of things. So yes, I had quite a few different field sites. I think in total I had 12 to begin with, and then we had to drop one because my ADCP, I don't think we could actually get that out where it was meant to be. It was just kind of out on the Ards Peninsula, Irish Sea place.
Okay.
I think we might have lost one of our ADCPs, but we did get it back. But I think it might have been dredged or trawled over at one point.
For anyone listening who has no idea what a ADCP is, what does it do?
It's so an ADCP is an acoustic Doppler current profiler. Were you checking that? I feel like you looked down there just to double check that I was saying it right.
No,
So
I'm conscious that there's pe people that I because I'm still bad listen hearing acronyms and I'm like, what does it
oh yeah, yeah,
quick Google?
yeah,
So it's just to make it clear for the
yeah.
but
So an ADCP actually sends out a ping into the water column,
mhm,
and then it can do all its calculations that I can't do and works out what's happening, the wave height. So it can give you your significant wave height or just your wave height, and you can get your current flow and your velocity. So it gives you like all the information you need just to sort of define your sites. So I was able to do that, and obviously some of my other environmental conditions, temperature, nutrients.
mhm,
And then from then, once I had those sites sort of chosen and all set in stone, I was able to tag my kelp. So I had them all tagged and numbered, and then I could measure the growth and the erosion. And then afterwards, I think I upset all the engineers by bringing in salty seawater kelp into the concrete lab area of the David Care, and I was using their tensile testing machine to test the strength of the kelp. So yeah, it was quite a it was qu
any
quite a mix.
education near very nice.
Yeah, they probably just thought I was some crazy kelp lady coming in with boxes of kelp, and I used to come in at like ridiculous hours. It would be like I could be in first thing in the morning, having collected it in Strangford Lough, or it could be 10 o'clock at night. I'm dropping off boxes of kelp. So yeah, but it was good fun. Good fun.
Very good. So after your PhD, then what happened? I know you had a jaunt in Australia. Um, what were
Yes.
you doing?
So after my PhD, it's very anticlimactic when you have your PhD. Like it just you hand it in and then someone's like, yeah, that's all good, very good. And then that's just it, really. So I applied for a couple of jobs, and I applied for one out in Australia, like you said, and got it. It's really super surprised I got it. So it was like a postdoc, well, like a senior research officer position, and it was only for 6 months. So everyone thought I was absolutely mad, packing up my life, and I was out in Australia within 3 weeks of saying yes, I'll take it without even having a contract in my hand. Um, and yeah, started that job at the university. I arrived on the Sunday, went to a rugby match with some of the ones from the uni on the Sunday evening, and started on the Monday morning. So it was all like a whirlwind, but absolutely brilliant. And I was working on seagrass restoration out there, which was new to me completely. Just coming from working on kelp for like 3.5 years to then having to learn all about seagrass on the airplane over. So it was a bit crazy. Um, but yeah, brilliant, brilliant experience, and I got to do some really interesting stuff out there. And it was, I think, the actual seagrass nursery that was at the university there was actually the first in Australia. So it was great to be part of that. And there were so many brilliant sites all around the southern end of the Great Barrier Reef.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's great. Take me back.
So you did a lot of diving then when you were out in Australia?
No, no, I didn't actually dive when I was in Australia at all, mainly because I didn't have my
Mm,
dive buddy.
okay.
So I just did snorkeling mainly. And especially like where we were doing a lot of the seagrass work was easier just to snorkel. It was relatively shallow.
Yeah.
So we were like that was fine for snorkeling. And then just when I finished up and I was traveling around, I did just snorkeling because it was the Great Barrier Reef and it's so clear. You didn't even need to dive on it really. But yeah, no, I did more diving during my PhD in Strangford Lough, just, putting out ADCPs and equipment,
Mhm.
quick dashes down, put something out, back up again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the seagrass, so well, you're obviously involved in the seagrass stuff back in Northern Ireland now. Um,
yeah.
what are the benefits to seagrass, and uh, why is it so important to have those habitats protected?
Yeah, so the seagrass, we have actually some really great seagrass beds here. One of them up at Waterfoot was obviously that's why that is designated as an MCZ. So we also have Ballyhenry Bay, which is recognized as like a really popular dive spot for the seagrass. And I recently dived on that and it was, it's in really, relatively good condition. I dived I suppose February time, it's hard to tell if it's like just because it's winter that it looks like that or, you know. But seagrass, yeah, it's like we were talking about the carbon capture idea, it stores away so much in the sediment, and also just nursery grounds for other critters out there, marine creatures. So it's just yeah, it's super and it's really like the poster child of blue carbon at the minute. It's like super hot topic and we don't really like we do have obviously maps of seagrass in and around Northern Ireland, but it would be great to keep those like monitored and I do know that Sea Search NI do a lot of diving around different places and dive hotspots in Northern Ireland and obviously keep track and try and do a bit of monitoring and sort of mapping of those areas because I'm certain that there is areas that are just not mapped yet. Um, and obviously that needs to be addressed maybe before restoration sort of kicks off. It's really getting that nailed down, where is the seagrass and what condition is it in? And then we can look at doing some restoration work. But we have, so outside of Ulster Wildlife, I have been working on a project that it is it's funded by DERA as well. I think that was a challenge fund
Mhm.
um, with Newry, Mourne, and Down District Council. So that was looking at eco moorings. So they installed eco moorings to trial different types. So there's the Sterling type and then the advanced mooring system. So two different types, and it's to stop basically the chain of just of a normal mooring block dropping down and dragging along and causing scarring in seagrass meadows. So that obviously tears them all up and creates this like area of just barren sediment that's just getting every time the tide changes or the water drops, that it's just getting, messed around. So these eco-marines should hopefully reduce that, keeps the chains up. There might be more buoys on them to keep the chain held up, or some of them have like I think it's the Sterling one is like a bungee cord effect.
Okay.
So it like moves with the tide as it goes.
Mhm.
Um and yeah, we dived on those and one of them was I think one of the boys had gone on it, so it hadn't really worked. Like it hadn't caused any scarring, but it hadn't really worked.
Yeah.
And then also the other one it worked great, and the seagrass was all around the mooring block, right up until the block, right up until the edge. And I think that's something that, especially in Strangford Lough, is really important. There's so many boats in there,
Mhm.
and there's so many like areas that are probably damaged that could be somehow repaired or if we just change our mooring blocks,
Mhm.
that could work. But that's a Newry Morning District Council project at the minute that they have ongoing. So I think that's for 5 years as well. They are going to be investigating that.
Very good. No, I only actually, I can't remember if I said this in my first podcast, but I actually came across that issue when I saw a drone shot of a seagrass bed with mooring uh, boats being moored in it, and then you
Yeah.
just see the circles, and you just
Yeah.
see yeah, just
Just sand, basically. It just
or
looks,
sand.
yeah.
Um, do you think there should be more awareness and education of boat users to kind? Because I know there's, well, to take Strangford Lough for example, there's a no anchor zone from
Yeah.
uh, well, if you know the Loch Conley Island south to near East Down Yacht Club, like there's a no anchor zone there.
Is it, yeah, it's like a closed zone
Yeah, so like,
completely. Yeah.
do you think there should be more awareness? I know like boat users should have they should be responsible and know where they can anchor and where they're not. But do you think there should be more
Yeah.
education and awareness made out of these?
Yeah, I definitely think there should be more, it should be definitely highlighted. So maybe there's people there that, really want to protect the marine environment and just don't know what's beneath the surface. Maybe they're always boating and they don't dive or they don't snorkel. So I think even being able to show where the seagrass beds are, and I think they just happen to be where people moor their boats. It just is like that is seems to just match up. So it's quite difficult because you don't want to take away people from their other, activities. So it's just getting that balance, and maybe those eco moorings, that's the balance we need. It just might achieve that. Um, yeah, so you'll have to get yourself an eco mooring for your boat,
Absolutely.
Sam.
Um, yeah, and I know a lot of people who would probably be willing to do that as well. 'Cause
Yeah,
like everyone who uses a boat around the coast appreciates being on the water because of the habitats
yeah.
and all the rest. So, like, if there's anyone there who doesn't appreciate that and who's out on the boat enjoying it, yeah, you kind of question whether, yeah, where
Yeah.
where's the sense in that. But yeah. So, Rachel, you mentioned about you dived placing ADCPs and stuff like that. Where is the best place you've dived?
Yeah, so I was hoping you'd ask me this so that I could
I
just
was waiting
boast where
for
I've dived. So, yes, I'd probably say the best place I've dived is Indonesia or Hawaii. We'll throw in Hawaii as well there.
gosh.
So, yeah, we like obviously it's lovely to dive in Strangford Lough, but obviously you're wearing a dry suit and it's chilly. It might not be chilly at the minute, actually, with this marine heat wave or the marine heat wave we've had. But yeah, it was just lovely to do like nice wetsuit dives on nice coral reefs and seeing loads of interesting things diving in Indonesia and Hawaii. But obviously, you see nice things in Strangford Lough as well, and you can dive the Innerleithes wreck, and that's really cool to get around a wreck. Um, but probably, yeah, I'd probably say Hawaii was my best dive. It was just great fun. It was me and my dive buddy Patrick were at a conference in Hawaii, and then we basically went out for a day trip and did a couple of dives. I think it was Horseshoe Reef, it's called, and there was like an octopus, and there was squid, turtles. Yeah, just amazing, really, just to get out and be with them, and obviously it's nice and warm. So just apart from the seasickness, it was choppy, very choppy.
And is there anywhere else on your list to dive? Any on the bucket list?
Bucket list dives, I'd probably say Tasmania would be nice. I'd love to do some kelp forest dives, Tasmania, or even, yeah, Monterey Bay, something like that in California. Love to do kelp forest dives.
That's it.
So I wrote,
Is that the kelp like the vertical stalks or like
yeah, yeah, like the supers, like they just look like massive forests,
yes, yeah.
but underwater, just yeah, that would be amazing. But I think, yeah, I think there's obviously ones down in South Africa, but I do think great white sharks use them as feeding grounds and whatnot. So might be a
Pick
bit
up a
scary.
marine
Might be
biologist
a
for
bit
dinner.
scary. Yeah. So, but yeah, that'd be really cool
Yeah.
to do that.
And then just to finish up, I wanted to ask you about any advice you have for aspiring marine scientists or biologists or anyone in the field that is remotely interested in this sort of stuff. Any advice from what you've been doing?
Yeah, so I would probably like obviously to get into it if you're not already in like a degree pathway to do this is basically to get involved in volunteering where you can in any projects. I know obviously the wildlife trusts just across the UK do obviously loads of volunteering projects and we're doing the oysters. So if anyone would like to help out with all of those, yes, brilliant. Um, and all there's loads of different projects that are ongoing. There's obviously I said about sea search as well. So if you're into diving or snorkeling, you can get involved with those projects. Um, but yeah, I think that is the way if you're not already in a degree pathway that's maybe going to open doors for you. Um, and yeah, it just depends what you kind of want to do. Obviously, you can go into consultancy or you can go into ENGOs or academia. Um, but yeah, yeah, if you could do that. I'm trying to think but I would just advise people really just to take risks and, try something new. Like I think going away and working somewhere new, a different country is just it kind of it's just character building in a way. You know, it's difficult. You're away from home, you're away from everyone and you just have to do things yourself and get on with it. And I think it's exciting. And yes, I highly recommend just taking a risk. And I seem to do those quite a lot at the minute.
It's like the 3 month contract or the contract to Australia you had to go.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Very good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like everyone thought I was mad, but I just think that was just really just had to do it. Like, how could I turn down a position like that in Australia?
You
Sure,
absolutely
if it didn't work out,
you
yeah,
come home. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
you can always come home.
Very good. Well, listen, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on to Coastal Catch Ups. Um, it's been great to hear about your work with Ulster Wildlife, the research stuff you've done with your PhD, uh, the plans for, yeah, I'm excited about the oyster restoration, and I'm looking forward to keeping tabs on that and seeing what happens there. So yeah, just want to thank you again, and
Yeah, thanks for having me
yeah,
on Coastal Catch-Ups.